Hello and welcome back to Maths with Mr. Duffield. I am the aforementioned Mr. Duffield, and quickly before I go home for lunch I'm going to work through 3 ratio questions that have been set to my third form across a couple of assignments that have been set on teams. Let's get straight to it. First one here. Thomas and Emma share money in the ratio 3 to 5. Emma gets £30 more than Thomas. How much money do they each get? Well, the first thing to recognise is these numbers relate to Thomas and Emma respectively. So Emma's getting more, and we've been told how much more. We can actually see how many shares additional that Emma gets than Thomas in this ratio. In other words, Emma gets 2 additional shares than Thomas in these ratio parts. And those 2 shares are worth £30 because we're told Emma gets £30 more. So that means 1 share in this ratio is £15. All right, just bear with me with the camera. So if 1 share is £15, and I know that this ratio relates to Thomas and Emma, I know that Thomas gets 3 shares and Emma gets 5 shares. And we know how much 1 share is worth, so we just have to scale up those shares by what that 1 share is worth. So Thomas has got to get 3 times £15, which is 45, and then Emma gets 5 times £15, which is 75. And then if we were interested in checking, the difference between these 2 amounts of money is £30, which matches what the question says Emma gets more than Thomas. Okay. And that's the first one. 45 for Thomas, 75 for Emma. Next question, a little bit more complex this. George buys first and second class stamps. Each first class stamp costs 67p. Each second class stamp costs 58p. The ratio of first class to second class stamps he buys is 1 to 4. He bought 20 stamps. What did they cost? Okay, so this is one of those versions of the stuff I was talking about in our class today. In other words, 1 to 4 is a simplified version of the actual numbers of stamps that he bought. In other words, can I express this ratio in a way that the shares add to make 20? Yeah, that's what I'm looking to achieve here. Hopefully you should be able to tell me that if you times if you times each of these numbers by 4, easy to make mistakes as you can see, 1 times 4 makes 4, 4 times 4 makes 16, and then if we sum these 2 parts together we get 20 shares in total, or in other words 20 stamps. Okay, so by timesing both sides of this ratio by 4, we found how many of each kind of stamp George has bought here. He's bought 20. 4 to 16 simplifies to 1 to 4, so these are the number of stamps that he's bought, with 4 being first class and 16 being second. Okay, now going back to what they cost, each first class stamp costs 67p, each second class stamp costs 58. So let's work that out. The total cost is 4 times 67p for the first class stamp plus 16 times 58 for the second class stamp. And if you just give me a moment to get out my calculator, that's 268 plus, unfortunately I'm not the kind of guy who can just run those things off in his head. You get 1,196 pence, which you can express, I think is probably a bit more sensible to express it as £11.96. And that's that question. Just using what we know about how many stamps he bought, i.e. considering this as the number of shares that we want that ratio to be converted to, and then doing so. Okay, that's the second one. My final question here is got more of a kind of proportionality vibe to it, and it's from the Dr. Frost task that I set you as part of the additional kind of wider work reviewing ratio and proportion. 8 hoses can fill a tank in 30 minutes. If I had 48 hoses, how long would it take? So that's a certain amount of time. Now, if we think about this logically, if I add more hoses to fill a tank with water, we'd expect the time to go down. So there's a proportional relationship, but it's inverse. Now the inverse proportionality relationship, just to do some some GCSE sort of notation, is that the length of time that it takes to fill the tank is equal to a certain number divided by the number of hoses that I have. Okay, so I effectively, to work out the answer to this question, I need to figure out what this K is. It's called a constant of proportionality. Okay, so if I'm filling a tank in 30 minutes, time is 30. K I don't know, and then that's the case for 8 hoses. All right, so I'm just replacing the time with the time that I've got in the question, and the number of hoses with the number of hoses I've got in the question. Okay, so T is replaced with 30. H is replaced with 8, and then we have to work out what K is by, you guessed it, multiplying both sides of this equation by 8. We get 240 equals to K, which means that this relationship between the time it takes to fill the tank and the number of hoses that I use to do so is time equals 240 divided by the number of hoses I'm using. Okay? And that will tell me how many minutes. So if I've got 48 hoses, I can just replace H in this equation with 48. 240 divided by 48, that gives me the length of time in minutes that it's going to take. And let me save you the suspense, that's 5 minutes. 240 divided by 48 is 5. All right, now I appreciate a bit of a weird question. There are other ways to think about it, but this is the kind of GCSE structure, and that's something I thought you might, enjoy being introduced to. Okay, there's a lot more coming your way about direct proportionality and inverse proportionality, and this K constant of proportionality later. But for the time being, that is the answer to the question. I hope that you got something out of that little review. I am intending to continue making these videos for as long as they are necessary. I wish you all the best with all the work that I'm setting you. Stay determined, and for goodness sake, get your work done on Teams. I will talk to you very soon.